Field unit travel calls on the majority of skills and techniques covered in this DVD, plus a good background of travel over glaciated terrain. Learning all the skills required and bringing them together can be a daunting prospect, as many of the techniques are specific to Bass and the Antarctic. Unit travel basically consists of 2 skidoos dragging 2 sledges. These contain everything you need to survive during an Antarctic field season. This convoy, while travelling, is fully linked together with thick ropes to help safeguard the riders while crossing crevassed areas. The 2 sledges contain different equipment. One is called the full unit sledge, which contains the day-to-day living equipment. This includes a pyramid tent and pegs, radio box, pots box, tent box, inside food box, and a number of man food boxes, depending on the duration of your trip. There is also a jerry board, 2 sleeping boards, a skidoo tarp or tarps, personal kit bags, 2 pee bags, 8 petrol jerrys, 1 kero jerry and possibly a toilet board. The half unit sledge works basically as a backup for the full unit sledge. It can also be used for day trips with the addition of the radio from the other sledge. This would allow you to work easily from a base camp and survive happily if you got stuck out. The half unit contains a pup tent, skidoo spares box, a spares box, 2 emergency clothing bags, spare link line bag, an iridium phone, a first aid box, a half unit pee bag, flags, skis or snowshoes, jerry board, and man food, kero and petrol. The number of these last 3 items would depend on your time spent in the field, but between the 2 sledges you will carry 30 days emergency food and fuel. The rest of this chapter shall cover each of these items individually and in detail. The sledges we use in Antarctica are called Nansen sledges. They are made from ash and have nylon on their runners. Nansens are held together with rope and leather thonging. This gives it enough stretch and mobility to stop any breakages, as the sledge bends when it is dragged across rough, undulating terrain. There is a cowcatcher at the front. This acts as a bumper and protects the sledge. Also at the front are 2 rope brakes, and there are 2 spare ropes tied on the back of the sledge should these wear out. Near the back of the runners are a set of chain brakes for use in icy conditions. These work by just wrapping them round the runner and clipping them back to themselves. The middle of the runners are both equipped with keels for traversing slopes. Before loading our sledge, we need to undo the lash lines as Mark is doing here. Also, we need to feed the centre line through the rope hangers on the underside of the sledge. The first item to be loaded is a jerry board. This will hold the weight of the jerrys in the centre of the Nansen. Any delicate or breakable items should be placed at the rear of the sledge, as there is less bouncing and jarring here. We put the radio box, pots box and tent box at the back, while Mark loads the jerrys, making sure they are the right way round so their weight sits in the middle of the sledge. We then load on the rest of the items: the inside food box, 2 man food boxes in the front, 2 sleeping boards on top of the jerrys, then kit bags, 1 pee bag, and the skidoo tarp lie on top of all of this. We try and keep the load level, so when we come to lashing on the tent, we don't strain the poles by bending them into the gaps in the load. We are now ready to lash up the sledge. The lash line comes over the top of the sledge and into the hooks on the other side. The first lash line loop goes to the second hook, and the second loop goes to the first hook. This generally holds the boxes more firmly in place. The lash line then continues normally along the length of the sledge. The first few lash loops run over the sharp edges of the boxes. It is worth filing the edges here, as over the period of a field season, the edges can cut their way through the ropes. Once we have lashed the sledge up, we tie it off with a clowfitch, then come back and re-tighten it all. Now we use the hooks at the front and back of the sledge and tighten the rope up using a trucker's hitch. Next, the rope is threaded through the metal rings on one side of the sledge in preparation for lashing the pyramid tent on. The pyramid is lashed on as before and finished off with a clowfitch. And again re-tightened along the length. Mark now attaches the centre line to the towing pennant with a mayon at the rear of the sledge. He does the same at the front and also attaches the tow line. The remaining pea bag gets strapped onto the cow catcher with bungees or rope. Next we load up each skidoo with a rescue sack, shovel, bog chisel, 2 snow stakes, ice axe and hammer and personal day sack. These are all secured firmly with rope and bungees. Under the skidoo seat we can load in a few 2-stroke oil containers, a spare mayon, a spanner for the mayons, a probe line for the lead skidoo and a skidoo tool bag. The seat is then secured down. Mark now attaches the tow line and personal safety line to the rear of the skidoo. The GPS is mounted to the field assistance skidoo. Mark then gears up with harness, glacial rack and helmet. The 6-metre safety line is lap coiled and placed under the bungees in the back of the seat. This allows it to unravel freely if the skidoo was to fall into a crevasse. He then attaches the safety line and kill cord to his harness. This means in the event of a snow bridge collapse, Mark would hang freely below the skidoo. During link travel we have the skidoos and sledges linked together by 20mm rope to safeguard the riders from a crevasse fall. There are 2 10-metre tow lines to the sledges and a 30-metre link line. When the unit is ready to set off, the first thing to do is work out some hand signals for travelling, as the 2 drivers will be too far away to hear each other. You can make up your own signals, but generally we have a signal for whether you are driving in first gear or second gear. A thumbs up from the front driver to the rear driver says he is ready to travel, and this is replied to by the rear driver with a thumbs up if he or she is ready to travel also. The signal for slowing down is a waving of the arm, and an arm held out is for coming to a halt. A clenched fist is for putting your brakes on or off, and a cutthroat sign is for turning your engine off. The field assistant sets up his GPS for the day's travelling. Although this GPS will only be used as a guidance, as you shall only be travelling in good contrast. So normally you can use landmarks for navigation, unless you are up on the Antarctic plateau. The GPS is mounted where you can easily drive while following it. Alpine 3 skidoos are very fast, and it can be tempting to use this speed if you have a long journey ahead, but you should be extremely cautious, as crevasses can be encountered rapidly while at speed, and before you have time to react. You must travel at an appropriate speed for the ground you are on. This might be 5 km per hour in particularly crevassed or sastrugied areas, or 30 km per hour while following your own tracks back over smooth terrain on a flat plateau area. Deep snow can be hard on the skidoos and time consuming, especially if you are getting bogged down and stuck. The skidoo engine can be damaged if they are worked too hard for long hours through very deep snow, so occasionally it may be worthwhile waiting a few days to allow the snow to compact. When travelling up steep hills, it might not be possible to travel with both sledges. In this situation we can double head up the slope with the 2 front skidoos joined by a link line. Returning back down the slope for the second sledge, we would keep the skidoos joined with the link line. When descending a slope, the sledges can catch up on the skidoos or overtake them. To stop this from happening, you should deploy the rope brakes or chain brakes if it is icy. Here Mark unties and unbungees the rope brakes and pushes them into position. The rope brakes don't need to be dug into the snow, as when the sledge starts moving, the ropes will be dragged into position. On steeper slopes, you may wish to deploy the keels also, to stop the sledges pivoting round the brakes. Here you can see the extra friction of the brakes digging into the snow. Once back onto the level, bring the unit to a standstill. To remove the brakes efficiently, Mark uses the rear skidoo to pull the front sledge back. The brakes release and are now easily tied up. With the rear sledge, Pete and Mark give it a push backwards, releasing the brakes, and then tie them up as before. When traversing slopes, the sledges will tend to slide out to the downhill side, and they can pull the skidoos with them given a steep enough slope. To prevent this, Mark and Pete stop before their traverse and deploy the keels. Mark removes the key lock and stamps the keels down, and then locks them in position. They traverse the slope, and once back on the flat, they can raise the keels again. If the traverse is steep, you may wish to only take one sledge at a time in between the skidoos, and possibly travel with half-length tow lines. Fully laden sledges are top-heavy, and they will roll if not driven with care. If this happens, it may be possible to roll the sledge further down the hill to right it. Mark puts the keels up before doing so, as they will bend easily. Occasionally sledges tip over on flat ground due to a gust of wind or rough sastrugi. There are two ways of righting a sledge in this situation. One is to unload the sledge, then turn it over and reload it, or you can right it using a skidoo. Righting the sledge with a skidoo is more efficient, but you do risk damaging your sledge. Plus, this technique is unadvisable in heavily crevassed areas. To right the sledge with a skidoo, Pete first digs a trench under the centre of the sledge. He then parks his skidoo perpendicular to the sledge and undoes the tow line. He threads a rope underneath and connects it with a mayon back to the tow line. He positions the end of the tow line on the far side of the sledge in the snow. This will concentrate the pull to this back edge. He now drives the skidoo carefully without jerking the sledge, pulling the sledge upright. Walking between the sledges can be dangerous, so Mark here keeps a hand on the link line while he walks to the front of the unit. He could also clip himself while slinging to the link line in case he falls into a crevasse. Probing ahead is something you may have to do if you encounter a slump in the snow in front of the skidoos, indicating a crevasse. Stop the skidoo before the slump, so you can go and probe the snow bridge to assess its strength before crossing with your full unit. Here Pete attaches a probe line to the front of the skidoo and attaches himself to it with a shunt. He now removes himself from the skidoo safety line. Pete is now safe to go and probe the route ahead with his bog chisel. Once all of these techniques have been learnt and practiced, then it is quite amazing where you can get to by skidoo. You may encounter small problems with engine maintenance on the way, but you carry all the spares you need. Some projects can cover over 1,000 kilometres in a season. These could be over flat areas, or near the mountains, or actually travelling up into the mountains. If you choose your routes carefully and maintain the skidoos and sledges well throughout the season, you can have a brilliant time travelling across Antarctica.